Greetings and salutations to all of my fellow rock and roll fanatics out there in podcast land. How you doing? It's Friday night, June the 13th, 2025, and it is time for yet another great and glorious episode of the Fortress of Rock, episode 198. Yes, we creep ever closer to that historic 200th episode. Still plotting and planning, trying to figure out something special to do for episode number 200. But for now, a little bit of a somber beginning, of course. Here for the Fortress of Rock, we start off with news of the world. Our tribute to the late, great Freddie Mercury and Queen. And we lost a couple giants in the world of music this past week, as most of you probably already know. Not trying to be redundant here, but of course, Brian Wilson, de facto leader, the creative force behind the Beach Boys, passed away just a few days ago. Devastating news for the world of rock and roll and music in general. I'm trying to balance out how I feel about this, because while I am a fan of the Beach Boys, I acknowledge the Beach Boys and their influence on music. I see the word genius getting thrown around a lot when it comes to Brian Wilson. I guess maybe I have a different definition of the word genius. I don't necessarily think anybody in the world of music is a genius. To me, a genius is somebody who comes up with a cure for cancer or invents something that revolutionizes the way we live our lives. And while you guys know I love music more than just about anything else on the face of the earth, I can't go so far as to call a musician a genius. But there's no denying Brian Wilson was one of the most inventive, creative forces ever in the world of music. The rivalry with the Beatles, of course. This is not an absolute shock that he passed away. He's been under conservatorship for quite a while. So I'm trying to balance things out here where I'm not going to go overboard like a lot of people out there in the media and Brian Wilson's peers are. I will say that we have lost one of the, I would say, 20 most influential people in the history of music and rock and roll. And while I won't go so far again as to call him a genius, I think what I have just said pretty much shows how much I respect and admire the man and what he accomplished in his life. Again, the genius thing, I think that's a little self-congratulatory pat on the back. Everybody who thinks they're geniuses have to acknowledge somebody who's a genius. I still don't think musicians can be geniuses. Maybe Brian May is, okay? Have you seen his educational background? Brian May of Queen might be a genius. But not because he's a phenomenal musician. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend people with this. Brian Wilson, easily one of the greatest figures in music history. And the world is definitely a sadder, emptier place without him. And then, of course, we lost Sly Stone this past week. Sly and the Family Stone. Not really my cup of tea in terms of music, but once again, you cannot go without acknowledging the historical music impact of Sly and the Family Stone. I did find myself going back to Brian Wilson, not trying to give short shrift to Sly Stone, but again, not really the music I listen to. Whereas the Beach Boys, definitely part of my life. Um, and I read a lot of the tributes online from all the rock and roll stars out there. And the one that I saw that probably hit closest to home for a normal average person like me is Gene Simmons. Gene Simmons basically said, I'm going to sit around all day today and listen to the Beach Boys. And I think for all of the weird and egotistical things that Gene Simmons has done in his life, pompous and arrogant actions and sayings and interviews, and that sounded to me like a rock and roll fan. That is the best tribute you can pay to Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, is to say, I'm going to go back into my album collection, my CD collection, jump on Spotify, whatever it might be, and listen to the Beach Boys today. That is the purest, simplest way to pay tribute to the great Brian Wilson. Unfortunately, the sad news does not end there. Now, we're not talking about death, but this is an item that I skipped over, unfortunately, last week. I did not mean to. One of the most underrated one-hit wonder bands, and I hate that label in a lot of cases, especially in this case. Aha. Of course, everybody remembers the all-time great video, one of the greatest, if not the greatest videos of all time, Take On Me. Catchy song, but there was more to them. I actually listened to more of their music than just their singles off of their first album, Hunting High and Low. By the way, vastly underrated album. Phenomenal album. I delved into the next couple albums after that. Aha deserve more credit than they get. They really do. And they have been around, still recording. They've stayed together for decades and decades. But unfortunately, their lead singer, Morten Harket, has announced that he has been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He minces nothing, makes no bones about the fact that it is now very difficult for him to sing, especially singing the way that he needs to and wants to keep the Aha sound intact, whether it's in the studio or live in concert. So this talk of illness and mortality, it does bum me out. It does. And this is not the first time, and it won't be the last, that we lose somebody extremely significant in the world of music. But I've alluded to this at times in the past since we started this podcast almost 4 years ago. Part of the reason that I wanted to do this podcast is that we need to keep this music alive, even though the artists and the performers are going to leave us. And there is going to be, again, not trying to be negative Nancy, there is going to be a cascade in the next decade. Artist after artist after artist that is going to pass away. We're going to lose the last two surviving Beatles. We're going to lose the Rolling Stones. We're going to lose the two core members of The Who. I hope they make it beyond the next 10 years. It's just mathematically the odds are against it. And then I did see an interesting story, I believe it was on ultimateclassicrock.com, about what will classic rock and classic rock radio look like in the future when all of these artists have died and gone and there's no more new music. And I know there's really no point in bringing up the new music even from classic rock artists, because they don't play new music from rock and rollers anymore on the radio. At least the classic rock and rollers. The Rolling Stones, thankfully, got a little bit of acknowledgement and airplay with their last album, Hackney Diamonds, but that was an exception to the rule. You do have some younger, I won't say young, but younger artists like Jack White trying to keep the rock and roll legacy alive. And of course, Jack White's not the only one, just the first one that comes to mind. I mean, you've got Alter Bridge out there, who I think are just phenomenal. But it's now getting few and far between. The ranks are getting thinned out, and it's going to get worse. Now, as a very awkward, terrible segue, we'll move into our concert news of the week, and that starts off with Rod Stewart. Rod Stewart, very, very healthy by all accounts for an 80-year-old man, but he has had to cancel numerous dates, some rescheduled, some not, on his current U.S. tour. Now I'm showing at least half a dozen dates that his illness has affected. And again, it's just the flu. We're being told it's just the flu. And next up, he's supposed to make an appearance at Glastonbury, playing with his old pal Ron Wood. And nobody wants this ride to end. Nobody wants this rock and roll roller coaster to shut down. Least of all me. Whether it's somebody I really like, somebody I kind of like, somebody I really didn't like. I'm not going to ghoulishly revel in it when Neil Young or Roger Waters pass away. I can give them a hard time on this podcast based on what they do and what they say. But that doesn't mean that the fans out there deserve their music. Again, you separate the art from the artist. But now with this news about Rod Stewart being ill, and again, it sounds like he will definitely bounce back and make a full recovery. I've already seen quotes from him where he's saying, they're telling me I can only play, I believe, an hour and 15 minutes at Glastonbury. And he says, give me at least 15 more minutes. I play 2 hours every night with no problem. So, kudos to Rod Stewart. And I've never been a huge Rod Stewart guy. I don't dislike him. I enjoy a lot of his music. But you guys know I've talked about this every once in a while, the levels of fandom. And the top level is, of course, you go to see a band or a performer live every chance you get. You own all of their significant studio albums. And then it drops down from there. Rod Stewart has always been a greatest hits level guy to me. Whereas I have his greatest hits, I enjoy them, but I have no desire to actually listen to his full catalog. But that does not mean that I abhor him or I dismiss his place in history when it comes to rock and roll. I do root for Rod Stewart. I do. Especially now that we've lost Brian Wilson, Sly Stone, and it's just going to get worse before it gets better. So we better all be prepared and listen to the music, as the Doobie Brothers once said. In other touring news, a lot of other artists who are getting up there in years. Yes. Yes is continuing with what they call the album tours, the classic album tours, something like that. Sorry, I don't have their specific label in front of me, but they are now going to embark on the Fragile Tour. Yes, that means they're going to play the album Fragile in its entirety on their upcoming tour. 31 dates so far scheduled in the United States in October and November. Now, I'm not a huge Yes fan. I did like parts of their career, and Fragile was an album that I did have in my younger years, did listen to. And I will admit shamefully that I also enjoyed the 80s MTV heyday, the rejuvenation, the resurrection of Yes, with Trevor Rabin. Of course, owner of A Lonely Heart, Leave It. I had fun with their music as well in the 80s, just like I did in the early 70s. But I was never a prog rock guy. So that's why outside of Fragile, I really didn't get into Yes all that much until the 80s. So the Fragile Tour sounds very interesting. Once again, 31 dates in the U.S. in October and November. David Byrne of Talking Heads is putting out his first new album in quite a while. It is called Who is the Sky? It will be out September the 5th. And he is embarking on a mammoth world tour starting in 2025 and then, of course, bleeding over into 2026. It breaks down like this. North American dates. Many North American dates from September through December of 2025. Again, those are exclusively in North America. So if you're a David Byrne Talking Heads fan, I suggest you get out there and see if he's playing near you. The chances are he probably is, because there are a lot of dates here from September through the end of 2025 in the U.S. and Canada. January of 2026, David Byrne will be in Australia and New Zealand. In February and March of 2026, he will be in Europe and, of course, the United Kingdom. So plenty of opportunities, plenty of chances for you to see David Byrne. And again, I like Talking Heads. Love the movie Stop Making Sense. If you've never seen Stop Making Sense, get a copy of it. Watch it. I don't know if it's streaming still. I believe last year it was streaming on HBO Max. So it might still be out there. The greatest concert movie ever. Even if you're not a huge Talking Heads fan like me, you will still enjoy it beyond belief. I've seen it so many times. So again, great to see David Byrne out there again. And then, kind of tying these two in together, and why wouldn't you, since they both involve Randy Bachman. First up, Bachman Turner Overdrive, BTO, have announced a few new dates in October and November. Here in 2025, they've got 8 more dates scheduled now in the U.S. on the East Coast. So, of course, Randy Bachman enjoying a career resurgence now, having BTO back. He's turned it into more of a family band. If you look at the current lineup, you'll notice there are a couple members of the band that are directly related to him now. So maybe that's why he's not referring to it as Bachman Turner Overdrive. He's just calling it BTO. I'm not trying to nitpick here. I get it. I understand legal issues and all that. But now Randy Bachman seems very happy with the fact that BTO is back and out on tour, but 2026 promises even more for him. Because, yes, we've talked about this here recently. The Guess Who are back. The 2 core members, Randy Bachman and Burton Cummings, back together again. We described the messy legal situation where they tried to get the rights back to their songs, or at least make sure other people who didn't deserve it weren't making money off of their songs. Because Bachman and Cummings were the primary songwriters for the Guess Who. So they have promised a full-scale tour in 2026, but for right now we'll have to settle for the announcement of the first performance of the newly reformed Guess Who. Their first show in 23 years together. Again, Randy Bachman and Burton Cummings will be in February of 2026 on the Rock Legends Cruise 13. Now, remember last week we discussed the different ways that artists and performers are trying to get music to us outside of the ways that we became comfortable with back in the 70s and the 80s. This is another option that seems to be really taking off. I'm not a fan of it because it's ungodly expensive. But these rock cruises are all over the place now. Hopefully, the bands are making their fair share on these cruises. Again, I'll say it. You're pricing the regular fan out of the market. And I know you don't care about the regular fan anymore. Live Nation doesn't. Ticketmaster doesn't. And for the most part, a lot of these performers don't either. But this is another part of the new norm. So once again, the Guess Who, featuring Randy Bachman and Burton Cummings, their first performance in 23 years, 2026, February, on the Rock Legends Cruise 13. And then one of those bands that we talked about last week to wrap up News of the World, that's trying to do different things, get their music out in a different way, is Queens of the Stone Age. Now, last week we mentioned the fact, after they had been teasing it for a while, that it's tough to call it a concert film. Their performance film, Alive in the Catacombs, is out now, where they were allowed to film in the catacombs underneath Paris, France. I'm almost 100% sure it's Paris. It's in France, and Please, please tell me I'm right. It's Paris. So that movie is out now. You go to their website, you can and basically buy it to download or stream. Another way bands are reaching out and giving their fans different options. And this is a lot less expensive than a cruise. I think we can all agree on that. But for those of us, yes, I'm pointing at myself here, I know you can't see it, who want some music to go along with it, some physical, tangible music, there is an EP that has been released today, June the 13th, 2025, called Alive in the Catacombs. Hey, same title as the movie. It is available on streaming as you're listening to this. So you can go out on Amazon or wherever you buy your digital music, you can purchase it. I have not seen a physical mass market release. No CD as of yet. There was a limited edition vinyl version of this that was available through the Queens of the Stone Age website, but that is already gone. That sold out very, very quickly. So for right now, the 5 tracks that are on this, they're not calling it an EP, I am. 5 tracks, that's an EP to me. So the 5-track EP, Alive in the Catacombs, is available now wherever you stream your music for purchase or just to listen to it. And of course, I'm debating about bending the rules and possibly, maybe, having a really, really cool, fun Queens of the Stone Age breakdown segment. Not just with Alive in the Catacombs, but something else, which we'll talk about in Wrap It Up later on in the podcast. So that's going to do it for News of the World, kids. We're going to move on now to break down our tribute to the late, great Tom Petty and his Heartbreakers. A lot of songs, 4 songs here that we're going to review this week on the Fortress of Rock. So what better way to start off Breakdown this week than with one of Tom Petty's former Heartbreakers. Yes, we have a new song from Mike Campbell and his new band, The Dirty Knobs. Now, I like Mike Campbell and The Dirty Knobs. We've reviewed their last couple albums here on The Fortress of Rock. Not the greatest output in the world, but still very good. So now I don't know if this song is a one-off. I don't know if this song is going to lead into their next album. But we have an interesting new song from Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs called Heart of the Heartland. Now we know, here on June the 13th, 2025, this country is undergoing a lot of chaos and unrest. And I really don't care how you feel about it one way or the other. I've always said, politics is personal. You vote for who you want to vote for. I will vote for who I want to vote for. I don't have the right to force my opinion on you, and you don't have the right to bully me. That's the way this should work in a perfect world. But of course, this is not the way it works. So that's why we have mass protesters on the West Coast, and now tomorrow supposedly protests all over the country because everybody hates the president, right? Somehow he got elected, but now everybody hates the president. Believe that if you want. I want to take Mike Campbell's new song, Heart of the Heartland, for face value. And on the surface, it feels like it's a love letter to flyover country. That's why I'm bringing up, in a very ancillary way, the politics, is because we are so divided right now. New York and California hate flyover country. Texas, I think, wants to be out on their own, just like California should be. But those of us that reside in the Midwest, we tend to be the ones that get scoffed, laughed at, and left behind. So, Heart of the Heartland, again, feels like it is a love letter to the Midwest. Yet, I am skeptical. Because as Mike Campbell has these lyrics talking about very specifically different areas of the country, different things about the farming communities and the things that people do and say and how they act in the Midwest. And 90% of the song seems to be an ode to how that is a great way of life. Now, I know Mike Campbell, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers started in Florida, which while it's not the heartland, it's not the Midwest, it's a kindred spirit, just with many, many more wealthy, rich retirees than the Midwest. But there are just indications in this song that maybe he's being a little cynical about the Midwest. The chorus, where is the heart of the heartland, puzzles me. What does that mean? Where is the heart of the heartland? Is he saying the people in the Midwest, in the heartland, don't really care about anybody else? There is no heart? I just find that a very odd turn of phrase for Mike Campbell to use in this song, whereas most of the song otherwise seems to glorify and fawn over the simpler life that people in the Midwest lead. Now, in terms of the music's pretty standard, pretty basic, nothing really extraordinary to set it apart. This is more about the lyrics. So, of course, you will have to listen to it to form your own judgment. I cannot recommend it because musically it is a little dull and a little boring, and lyrically it seems like he's trying too hard just to find things that rhyme. What rhymes with John Deere tractors? I'm not ripping on the song. It's not terrible. It just, I'm from the Midwest. Now, I have had my dalliances down south and lived in Florida for roughly 11, 12 years. But I was born and raised, and I am still now back in the Midwest. So I do have an affection for this area, but I am more than willing to accept criticism and point out the flaws. So it would be wonderful if I could sit down with Mike Campbell and ask him and get a sincere, truthful answer. What are you saying with this song? Are you really saying you admire and love the simple life of the Midwest? Or are you making a subtle jab, a subtle dig? Because I know Tom Petty went from Florida, transplanted to California. And we all know how, quote unquote, wonderful California is. So, even though it seems simple on the surface, Heart of the Heartland, I think, is more complex. And the best songs do this. You read into the lyrics, you interpret the lyrics the way you want. And this is how I'm interpreting Heart of the Heartland by Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs. But in the end, just as a song, not that great. Very mediocre, so I would pass, if I were you, on Heart of the Heartland. I will also pass on the second single from the upcoming album from the Alice Cooper Group. Of course, we've discussed the fact that Alice Cooper has gotten his old band back together from the 70s. Second single is called Wild Ones. Now, I will make a confession right off the bat. I try to be as truthful and honest as humanly possible with you kids. I'm not a huge latter-day Alice Cooper fan. I love the 70s stuff just like most people. I'm 18, under my wheels, school's out, glorious, great rock and roll. Poison makes me want to vomit. And I'm not talking literally about taking poison. I'm talking about the song Poison that kind of resuscitated Alice Cooper's career. I can't stand that song. And Alice Cooper really hasn't come back from that. Everything now is much more polished, much more shiny, has a pop sheen to it. Doesn't have the nasty, dirty little edge that his stuff from the 70s did. And Wild Ones, unfortunately, is no exception. For a song called Wild Ones, this song is pretty tame, and yes, again, formulaic and generic. Now, if you want to call me out and say I'm being a hater, that's fine. Keep in mind, though, I have also come out in the past and said that the one time I saw Alice Cooper in concert opening for Motley Crue, he kicked Motley Crue's butt. So, I don't hate Alice Cooper. I just like old Alice Cooper as opposed to newer Alice Cooper. Now, newer, unfortunately, covers right now about 35 to 40 years. But Wild Ones does nothing for me. Really does nothing for me. Now, paired with the first single, Black Mamba, really not overly excited about this upcoming album from the Alice Cooper Group. So now you're going, geez, Maestro, we're 0 for 2 right now? It's okay. I got 2 more songs to go. Now, I was supposed to see this band live in concert a few weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, to be exact. And it fell through because the weather turned a bit nasty. And, of course, other considerations. The Black Moods, one of the smaller bands that we follow here on the Fortress of Rock, have yet another new song out. Where's the full album, guys? Where is the full album? I understand times have changed and the way you release music has changed, but my God, how many songs you got out now? 6 or 7? Let's put out the full album. Finally. Can you? You did this the last album, and you really pushed me to the edge of insanity with this. I don't mind releasing 4 or 5 songs, and then a year down the road, you put out the album. But this is getting ridiculous. So now the latest song from the Black Moods is Where Have the Good Times Gone? No, it is not Where Have All the Good Times Gone. It is not the Kinks. It is not Van Halen. And I like this song. Yes, I'm complaining about all the outside stuff with the Black Moods. This song is really good. I liked it. Now, a lot of people I've seen, friends of mine who've listened to it, comments on social media, do not like it at all. They think this is continuing to show that the Black Moods have somehow lost their edge, lost what made them a rock solid rock and roll band for the last 8 or 9 years. I agree with some of the songs, especially the early releases. Sugar, Heaven, very, very sketchy. This song to me is awesome. It's a mid-tempo, mournful pseudo ballad. It's perfect again for the times right now. Doesn't matter what side of the political fence you're on, we can all acknowledge the fact that things are kind of weird right now. Now, I would question the fact, have we ever really had good times? I know there's some people out there that go, oh, all the 80s. And I would be one of them that would be close to saying that. The 80s were awesome. If I had to pick good times, it would be the 80s. But many people out there who grew up in different eras would pick the eras they grew up in as the good times. But I think Where Have the Good Times Gone fits perfectly in with our mindset as a country, our mindset as a world right now. Very simple. In a way, it reminds me of, God help me for saying this, Fight the Good Fight. It doesn't overstretch what it's trying to do. It doesn't push the boundaries farther than it has to in terms of just being a simple, in two different ways, call to arms. Whereas Fight the Good Fight is more of a fist pumping, get you rousing, get you fired up, get the adrenaline going, makes you want to fight for what you believe in. Where Have the Good Times Gone is more of a contemplative, think about where we are right now, personally and as a country and as a world. Just think about it. That's what I love about the song. It's a very subtle nudge, a very subtle push to get you just thinking a little bit for a couple minutes about where are we right now? Where are you personally right now? Where are we as a society right now? So despite the fact that most people don't seem to like it, I love the new song from the Black Moods, Where Have the Good Times Gone? And then finally, Bush, the latest release from their upcoming album, I Beat Loneliness, is The Land of Milk and Honey. Again, a very interesting song given the times we're living in right now. But now this type of song has been prevalent for decades. Right? The Land of Milk and Honey. Everybody supposedly flourishes. Everybody's rich. Everybody is making tons of money, right? And we all know that's not true. And these types of songs, there are hundreds and hundreds of them over the decades, say basically the same thing. Whether it's slyly, sarcastically, like Bush here, or out and out, right in your face. Not everybody is doing well. Not everybody is making a ton of money. We get that. Anybody with half a brain gets that, okay? But the Land of Milk and Honey takes that message and kind of transforms it into a rock-solid Bush song. There seems to be more energy in this song than a lot of the stuff they've put out recently. And I've kind of liked a lot of what they've put out recently. But the Land of Milk and Honey does seem to exceed expectations a little bit more. This is one of the strongest Bush songs I've heard in years. So I will definitely recommend The Land of Milk and Honey. I will definitely recommend The Black Moods. Where Have the Good Times Gone? I cannot recommend the Alice Cooper Group with Wild Ones, and I'm torn, but I cannot recommend Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs, Heart of the Heartland. So there we go, we're split. 2 positive, 2 negative. So now breakdown is done. We head out to the garage here at the Fortress of Rock, where Doc Brown awaits with the rock and roll DeLorean. He's going to fire that sucker up, 1.21 gigawatts, 88 miles an hour, take us into the rock and roll time stream, where we're going to talk about past events, the history of rock and roll. We've talked about present day rock and roll right now. The headlines, the music, now we go back in the past. But of course, as I strap into the DeLorean, Doc Brown gets us going, I have to take care of business. First up, I do my best to come up with these story ideas on my own, but I do need help and assistance. Now, the opinions are mine and mine alone. But I have 3 main sources for some of these ideas, especially in segment 1 and here coming up in segment 3. UltimateClassicRock.com, invaluable source. Best source I have found out there for rock and roll news, especially classic rock. ThisDayInMusic.com, great, simple, quick source for the history, day by day, of rock and roll. And then, of course, when we have Van Halen news, and it usually comes in a flood, a torrent. We haven't had any in a few weeks, but I'm sure somehow it's coming. When that happens, I always go to the VanHalenNewsDesk.com. And then, of course, you found us somewhere. Thank you so much for that. But you have options and choices, and they keep growing and growing. Right now, as of today, June the 13th, 2025, we are on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Apple, iHeartRadio, Overcast, Amazon Music, Castbox, Audible, Good Pods, and, for better or for worse, YouTube. And let me just tell you, YouTube does not make things easy. We're still tweaking the YouTube channel. If you go search for it, you will find it. But I'm already getting harassed saying you haven't filled in enough keywords, or you haven't done this, or you haven't used the advanced features. Oh, it's not enough that I uploaded all of these episodes. So, we're continuing to work on the YouTube page tentatively. We are also looking within the next couple weeks at launching on Instagram. I will not commit to it yet. Let's just say we are exploring it as we try to expand our profile for the Fortress of Rock. And of course, we are still on Facebook. And you know we have 2 fun things that happen every weekend on the Facebook page. Sunday afternoon is New Music Sunday, where I will post a link to a YouTube video, ironically. A new song, something you have not most likely heard before. We've got to keep the new music alive. We've got to keep these artists and performers interested in giving us new music. So this is our little way of trying to do that. So check out New Music Sunday. I'm not sure what song, what video I'm going to put out there this Sunday, which of course will be June the 15th. Not sure yet, but it will be there. I do not miss New Music Sunday unless I have a massive internet outage. like we had a few months ago. Then, of course, tonight, if you're listening to this episode as it has just been dropped, just been released, then Friday night on the Facebook page is the Weekend Rock Project. It is out. It is up and running. If you want to do something massive and monumental, you have to ask yourself one simple question. Either I can do this or I can't. So we're looking for your best, your favorite rock songs with the word can, can't, or cannot in the title, and that's it. We're going to be very strict this week, as we've had some people trying to be clever, and I give them credit for being clever, but now that I've put the restriction in place, you can't post a song with a word that has C-A-N or C-A-N-T within a longer word. We don't want that. You have to abide by the spirit of our Weekend Rock Project this weekend. Can, can't, cannot. Those are the words you can use. So, with all that being said, it is time. We are up to speed. Let's look back at the history of rock and roll with anniversaries of classic album releases, birthdays, and unforgettable moments in rock and roll history. It is time for I Want to Go Back, our tribute to the late, great Eddie Money. All right, so let's start off with anniversaries here for June the 13th. On this day, June the 13th, 2003, the Arctic Monkeys performed live for the first time ever. Sheffield, England, of course, was the site of the first live performance ever from the Arctic Monkeys. On this day, June the 13th, 1995, Alanis Morissette released her, I guess you would call it a legendary album, Jagged Little Pill. Now here's a legendary album. On this day, June the 13th, 1975, Peter Frampton performed the first of two nights at the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco. And of course, those recordings were later put out as Frampton Comes Alive. Arguably the most important live album in the history of rock and roll. I know there are many out there who will argue with me on that. We can have a discussion, but to my knowledge, I can't think of a more influential, I'm not saying personally it's my favorite, but I can't think of a more influential live album than Frampton Comes Alive. Then we get a double shot of the Beatles, of course. Any week that goes by here on the Fortress of Rock, when you're talking about rock and roll history, there is no way you can skip over the Beatles. It's just not possible. It seems like every week, every day of the year, at some point between the early 60s and 1970s, something important happened involving the Beatles, and today is no exception. On this day, June the 13th, 1970, and I love this song. This is one of my favorite Beatles songs, The Long and Winding Road was the number one song, the number one single in the U.S. on this day in 1970. My the great thing about the Beatles, and I am not a Beatles fanatic. You guys know this. I appreciate the Beatles. I admire the Beatles. We talked about Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys in segment one. I feel the same way about the Beatles. They're not my favorite of all time, but I cannot deny the massive impact they have had on the world of music. In my opinion, they launched the era of rock and roll in 1964. So the great thing about the Beatles is everybody has a different opinion about what their best song is. Some people like the psychedelic era. Some people like the earlier poppy stuff. I like the later era, more thoughtful, mournful stuff. Hey Jude, The Long and Winding Road, Let It Be. I will say the psychedelic stuff is my least favorite. I almost laugh at some of the stuff that they put out that people think is so brilliant. Yellow Submarine, Octopus's Garden. That's where I go, your love for the Beatles has gone too far. Okay? I do like a lot of the earlier poppy stuff. And especially the stuff that was kind of transitioning from that into the next phase. Stuff like Paperback Writer. Love Paperback Writer. But The Long and Winding Road is definitely one of my top 10 Beatles songs of all time. And also on this day, June the 13th, back in 1970, while The Long and Winding Road was the number one single in the U.S., Let It Be by the Beatles was the number one album in the U.S. on this day, back in 1970. And then finally, we can talk about the rivalry between the Beatles and the Beach Boys. We can talk about the rivalry between the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. I've always preferred the Rolling Stones to the Beatles. Again, just personal taste. I can like both of them. On this day, June the 13th, 1969, Mick Taylor was introduced as the new Rolling Stones guitarist. Now, of course, that would be rhythm guitarist, because we all know Keith Richards is lead guitar for the Rolling Stones. Has been, always will be. So let's move on to birthdays here for June the 13th. We'll start off June the 13th, 1970. Rivers Cuomo was born on this day in 1970. Of course, he is the lead singer and guitarist for Weezer. And while I appreciate Weezer and I appreciate their love of 80s music and their definite love for Van Halen, how could I not give them some props and respect for that? Of course, their last album was called Van Weezer. And their logo that they've been using, of course, it's been a long time, but when I was in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, we're going back 20 years at least, but their big stage setup logo, patterned off of the Van Halen logo, was hanging in the lobby of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You gotta respect them for that. Outside of that, very hit and miss for me. Weezer is very, very hit and miss. Now, there are some great songs. I love Hash Pipe. The first album has a lot, the Blue Album has a lot of really good songs. There are other albums I probably should listen to a little bit more, like Pinkerton. But some of the stuff after that, doesn't really do a ton for me. I will say this. And of course, I always have to bring it back to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I just did a minute ago. If Weezer gets in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame before Boston or REO Speedwagon or Styx, I will be insane. That would be the biggest disgrace in the history of music. And it's not like they already haven't made fools of themselves with the Eurythmics getting in and Sheryl Crow getting in before those bands I just mentioned. But considering the fact that Weezer basically admits that all those bands from the 70s and the 80s influenced them, and they love them, and they pay tribute to them, you're going to put them in ahead of those bands? That's sacrilege. Sorry, that is rock and roll sacrilege. On this day, June the 16th, June the 13th, 1957. Happy birthday to Rolf Brendel, drummer for Nena. Remember Nena? 99 Luftballons. They were definitely a one-hit wonder. So once again, born on this day, June the 13th, 1957, Rolf Brendel, drummer for Nena. Born on this day, June the 13th, 1952, Russell Javors, longtime guitar player throughout the most popular phase of Billy Joel's career. And of course, that was what was always cool about Billy Joel. And I know they have had fighting about this, and there have been lawsuits threatened, and there's been some ill will. But you got to admit, from The Stranger on through to the late 80s, we knew most of, at least by facial recognition from the videos, we knew the guys that were in Billy Joel's backing band. Liberty DeVito, of course, on drums, and Russell Javors. Man, I'm messing things up left and right here. Russell Javors, guitar player in Billy Joel's band throughout the Piano Man's heyday. Russell Javors, born on this day in 1952. So I got 2 strikes against me. I've messed up twice. A third one, and I will stop this podcast. Just kidding. I won't. And if you are laughing and saying you would like that, shame on you. You're supposed to be my friends. Born on this day, June the 13th, 1951. Howard Leese, longtime guitarist. We always think of Heart as Ann and Nancy Wilson. Howard Leese, outside of the Wilson sisters, was the longest tenured member of Heart. Their guitarist was in the band from 1975 through 1998. So once again, Howard Leese, born on this day in 1951, guitarist for Heart. Born on this day, June the 13th, 1949. I'm going to botch this name. Okay, so this is not my third strike. Dennis LeCourrier. I think I got that pretty good. Dennis LeCourrier, vocalist and guitarist for Dr. Hook. Of course, famously known for their song, the cover of the Rolling Stone, and then, of course, they got on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. And then finally, to wrap up birthdays, June the 13th, 1941, Marv Tarplin. Marv Tarplin was a guitar player for the Miracles. Of course, eventually they became Smokey Robinson and the Miracles because, of course, the lead singer's ego is always so massive. that he or she feels like the band should step back and give them the fame and the glory they deserve, where the guitarist, the bass player, the drummer, the keyboard player don't deserve nearly the recognition or respect or as much money as they do. But once again, born on this day, 1941, Marv Tarplin, guitar player for The Miracles. And that is going to do it for I Want to Go Back. Our trip back into the past, into the rock and roll time stream. Now Doc Brown is turning us around, aiming for the garage at the Fortress of Rock. We are going to pull in to the garage, pull the drawbridge up over the moat. It's starting to rain here, so it's a good thing. Not exactly a great early summer evening. Little gloomy, so good thing we're locking it up and we're shutting things down, but we are not quite done yet. You know this. One last segment to go as I wander back into the studio here at the Fortress of Rock. It is time for segment 4, otherwise known as Wrap It Up, our tribute to the fabulous Thunderbirds. We've talked about the past. Just did that with Doc Brown and the DeLorean. We've talked about present day rock and roll. Now it's time to look into the future. Gaze into the crystal ball, if you will. Now, I will admit, and it's been this way pretty much all of 2025, sporadic in terms of being able to set up definitive episodes from week to week. We're good to go probably for the next 3 weeks. And then after that, the question marks start popping up again. So, we broke the news on this last Friday. Even though physically the album is not out yet, on streaming it is available, so we will be able to review it for you next Friday, episode 199 of the Fortress of Rock, dropping on June the 20th. The Cold Stairs, the Southern Part 2. Obviously a companion to the Southern. I've listened to it. I would argue that it's probably a little bit better than the first. But you'll have to wait till next week for my full review for the Cold Stairs and the Southern Part 2. But feel free to jump in and listen to it. It is available on streaming, wherever you listen to your music. You just can't buy it physically yet. Mentioned last week, July the 18th is when the physical format versions of the Southern Part 2 will be available. Then in 2 weeks, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do here, because that is episode 200, dropping on June the 27th. I have some tentative plans for a normal episode, but I feel like I need to come up with something special. I have an idea that I've been ruminating about, an idea that's gestating. I'm working on it. I don't know if I'll go through with it or not. For now, though, I would, if I were you, on episode 200, expect a double shot of Queens of the Stone Age. I'm looking right now at reviewing the 5-song EP, Alive in the Catacombs, but also dragging Doc Brown back into the past. Yes, we're going to do this again, where we will look back, we will review the very first album from Queens of the Stone Age as well. So we will review new Queens of the Stone Age in a way, and then of course old original Queens of the Stone Age, the very first album. And in 3 weeks, this is definite. Even though it's the July 4th episode, and it seems kind of odd. Yes, I know he did Born in the USA, but he's also made his voice heard that he despises America. I'm sorry, I'm just saying it. Bruce Springsteen's a hypocrite. But that being said, in 3 weeks, episode 201, dropping on the 4th of July, will be my review of Bruce Springsteen, Lost and Found Selections from the Lost albums. Of course, that is referencing the big box set coming out, tracks 2, 7 unreleased albums from Bruce Springsteen. Sorry, I've told you this, I'm not reviewing all 7 albums. I might poke around here and there down the road and review some of it, but what you're going to get from me is this condensed collection of 20 songs, the best of basically tracks to the 7 unreleased albums, and that review will be coming again in 3 weeks, episode 201 on July the 4th, and then after that things get fuzzy. I'm still debating whether or not I'm going to review the Doobie Brothers' new album, Walk This Road. I've heard half of it and I hated it. Literally hated it. But all I keep hearing is, oh, it's one of their best albums. It's easily the best they've put out since the early 80s, if not going back to the 70s. Really? What are you hearing out of what they've released so far? I know the full album's out, but I'm talking about the singles that were released ahead of time. What did you hear from that made you fall in love all over again with the Doobie Brothers? I thought it was generic, boring, adult contemporary crap. But do I humble myself and finally break down, lift the embargo, and listen to it? Might have to do that in 4 weeks. Yes, we just reviewed a bunch of songs. So now that well is running dry. I'm still kind of upset with Wolfgang Van Halen in that he has not released a new single from Mammoth yet. We will have a new song to review next week, along with the Cold Stairs album. The Hives, second release from their upcoming album, The Hives Forever. Forever the Hives is Paint a Picture. It is leaked out already. It was supposed to come out June the 17th, but it is out now. So we will have a review of that for you next week, along with the Cold Stairs, the Southern Part 2. Yes, I know all those Springsteen songs are sitting out there that I didn't review. But in 2 weeks we're going to review, or 3 weeks, I'm sorry. 3 weeks we're going to review Springsteen anyway, so I don't see the point in reviewing all the songs that we're just going to be reviewing in 3 weeks anyway. So finally, that leads us into our tribute to the Billboard charts, where we decided we can do it better. Now, we wouldn't have said that back in the 70s or the 80s, because Billboard did a pretty good job of charting the pulse of the U.S. when it came to music, when it came to the Hot 100, the top 200 albums. I rarely complained. I complained about the taste of America when it came to some of these songs, like when Debbie Boone's You Light Up My Life ruled the charts week after week after week in the 70s. I was like, Jesus God, people, what are you doing? Listen to something better, will you? This is one of the worst songs ever. But it wasn't like I doubted the charts. I believed that, yes, people were listening to that song, and yes, they somehow, some way, enjoyed it. Ugh. Ugh. But now it's all gone crazy. It's all gone haywire with SoundScan first in the 90s, and now the digital music and how they measure that. It's just an absolute joke. So the Fortress of Rock, we took it upon ourselves to start our own charts. We started this at the beginning of 2024. We just keep rolling right along because this is the best way, distilled down to its essence, to tell you guys what I've been listening to the past week, what I think the best songs are, and the best album of the week is. So we'll start off with our top album of the week here on the Fortress of Rock. And this has been an interesting battle here between the Spin Doctors and the Counting Crows, going back and forth and back and forth. Now with the Cold Stares entering the picture, they'll probably make it a 3-band fight for the next month or so. But this week, Face Full of Cake by the Spin Doctors retakes the #1 spot on the Fortress of Rock album charts. And I am telling you, you can laugh at me all you want. It is a great, great album. And then our top songs, we always pick 2 songs each and every week, because one is just not enough. Our top songs of the week here on the Fortress of Rock are The Land of Milk and Honey by Bush. And even though I talked about how much I love the Black Moods, maybe next week, guys. Boombox, the first song on Spin Doctor's Face Full of Cake, deserves its day in the sun. It has never reached the top of the Fortress of Rock charts since the album came out. Now it has. It deserves it. It's a fun, fun song. So to recap, your #1 album this week, Face Full of Cake by the Spin Doctors. Your top songs, Boombox by the Spin Doctors and The Land of Milk and Honey by Bush. And that is going to do it for another glorious, phenomenal episode of the Fortress of Rock. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. Hope you've got concerts lined up here this summer, because before you know it, summer's going to be gone, kids. Enjoy it while you can. Unless you live like in California or Texas or Florida, where it's pretty much summer all year round. Of course, California, you have to deal with people burning cars and rioting in the streets. But, hey, it's always 70 and sunny, right? We will do this again in 7 days. Episode 199 will drop in 1 week on June the 20th, 2025. But until then, I am the Maestro, Kevin Crane. You are who you are. I am the Ayatollah of rock and rolla. Please take care of the people you love. Love the ones you're with. Friendship, family mean more than anything, except maybe rock and roll. So until we do this again in 7 days, peace out, everybody.